From dream realms to walled cities under siege, fantasy TV has never been more alive than it is today. But what separates a good fantasy from a world that you can't escape? Today we're counting down the top 5 fantasy television shows ranked on IMDb's 250 best fantasy TV shows of all time. And we're going to be discussing why it just doesn't entertain, it also reimagines and rewires how we think about it. I'm Sage Patel and I'm author of the Tarak universe, where myth and science collide. And whether you write worlds, you watch them, or just want to understand what makes one of them unforgettable, this is your map to the best fantasy storytelling ever put on the screen. Now, IMDb's list ranks by audience voice, meaning the sheer excitement that people have about whether they love or they hate it. But popularity isn't enough. So I've added 3 additional layers to this countdown. Let me know how you feel about them. First is internal logic. Does this world play fair with its own rules? Second is emotional architecture. Are characters the engines, not the ornaments? Third is legacy. Do the stories echo long after they end? But fantasy that lasts doesn't just show us dragons, it shows us ourselves. Our journey today will be featuring these 5 shows. 5 worlds, 5 philosophies of power. Let's start with the dream where it all began. Now, I do not think the Sandman, to be fair, is one of the best fantasy shows of all time. However, it does fit within these 3 categories that I've also outlined within the top 50. Now, I don't believe The Sandman is one of the best television fantasy shows of all time. I will actually be doing my own sequence of what I actually think that is pretty different actually from the IMDb rankings. But again, I go at it with a different lens that isn't just beyond popularity. And again, these shows are all still very well heavily featured in the top 20 in general on the 250 best IMDb television shows for fantasy of all time. So The Sandman. The Sandman isn't just fantasy, it's like metaphysics with style. Each realm obeys emotion, not physics. Dream, death, desire, all divine ideas wearing mortal faces. What makes this show brilliant isn't just its spectacle, it's its restraint. It dares to be poetic, calm, tragic. The author Neil Gaiman once said that dreams shape our reality. The Netflix adaptation proves that that's true. But it also proves how fragile imagination can be when adapted to the modern screen. Here are the strengths of The Sandman. It stays faithful to its emotional truth, and each realm has its own rules. It turns ideas, grief, desire, purpose, to geography. And in doing so, The Sandman reminds us that the most powerful fantasy worlds are internal. They don't need to be explained, they just need to be felt. Here are some of the weaknesses now of The Sandman. Its episodic nature also kind of undercuts its own gravity. And by that, sometimes it feels like each of the short stories feels disconnected to the overall one when you really take into account the first 2 seasons. And it's a dream, in my mind, that you just keep waking from. So now let's talk a bit from a writer's lens. For me, it's a lesson in balance. I think ambiguity is a gift until it erases the consequence. And what I mean by that is a dream world still needs structure. Specifically around the fact that I think the power dynamics became very unclear. He is a member of the Endless, but at the same time, is he all powerful? It makes him seem like they're all powerful, but then it sort of changes the script on it towards the end, which is of course okay, but just needs guardrails around what makes world building great. And for me, in Tarak, I must obey the same rule. The impossible must still obey its own physics. So from a universe made of metaphor, let's step into one built of monsters, men, and mutation. Now, The Witcher is about to launch its 4th season, coming soon with a new helm at the cast, not being Henry Cavill anymore, but instead Liam Hemsworth. This is a very controversial move, considering this was a really good franchise for Netflix. But now with the new cast change, it might be harder for viewers to feel as entertained. So perhaps The Witcher will not be ranked in IMDb's top fantasy shortly thereafter. Hopefully not, but it's definitely a possibility. So let's jump into it. The Witcher exists where folklore meets cynicism. A dirty, dangerous world where every contract has a clause and every curse has a consequence. For me, what makes it endure isn't the swordplay, it's pretty much the worldview. Geralt's moral grayness is what keeps the center of the show going. He pulls you in like gravity. His world doesn't really distinguish monster from man, and that's kind of the point. Fantasy often promotes purity, and in many ways, The Witcher rejects it. So, what are the strengths of the show? It nails the ecology. The monsters feel born of the land, not just summoned by CGI. And the political layers echo a kind of real mythic Europe. Superstition wrapped in bureaucracy. And every magic rule demands a cost. Power must balance consequence. I think also what makes The Witcher great is you have this found family aspect. And if you know anything about me so far, I love me a found family. But taking this in the writer's lens now, I personally see The Witcher as a masterclass in storytelling with tone, but a warning through its focus. And what I mean by that is you build your chaos carefully. And the moment your audience feels lost without reward, your world sort of loses its gravity. I think The Witcher has tons of potential to become something very grand and very cool, and something that I think will be able to teach many of us as storytellers, writers, authors, creators, what would make sense in a world where you have to transition one of your main characters literally out and put someone new to be acting in it. Our next entry is potentially one of the best shows I've ever seen ever, and I actually agree with it being in the top 5 on IMDb. Imagine humanity trapped behind very tall walls, praying to gods that feel like human skin. Number 3 on our list is Attack on Titan. Few shows have weaponized despair like Attack on Titan. It's definitely not just fantasy. It's theology disguised as military fiction. Humanity's cornered and terrified, and they ask one question: what if we were the monsters all along? Every wall in the show is both a fortress and a metaphor. The Titans aren't villains, they're also mirrors. And what makes this series genius is how well they're able to build the lore around something that feels very tiny at first, and then constantly questioning what it is that you're actually watching. And leading into that, what are Attack on Titan's strengths? Its world building is systemic. History, government, bloodlines, religion, all interlock like gears. The mystery unfolds not through exposition, but through revelation. Every season redefines what you thought you knew and forces you to question moral certainty itself. That's what makes this show so brilliant. At first, you think you're just watching what seems like a simple premise of a show, and it evolves into something so grand that no one could see most of that coming. Now, some of its weaknesses. Its ambition burns fast. I think the pacing grew breakneck. Emotional beats sometimes drown in spectacle. By its final arc, it's not about survival anymore. It's about ideology, and that can polarize. Now, thinking about it from an author's lens. As an author, I can see Attack on Titan as a blueprint, with some minor caution. It shows how escalation can serve as theme, until it consumes its own coherence. And don't say that entirely. I do think there are moments where it does this, but not entirely. So because of that, in Tarak, I guard against that. The larger the war, the tighter the rule. So from man devouring gods to gods pretending to be man, we ascend to our number 2. Our next entry feels like it needs no introduction because Game of Thrones is not just a show. It was a cultural phenomenon. In many ways, it still is, with or without the spin-offs that are currently underway and are about to be released. Game of Thrones is a cautionary legend for any writer who dreams of scale. It built a dynasty of intrigue, then collapsed beneath its own crown. And what I'm talking about, again, to clarify, is the TV show, not the book series that is still ongoing by George R. R. Martin. Still, what Game of Thrones achieved as a television show cannot be understated. It is the biggest show of all time. It merged fantasy with real politics, and it taught global audiences that magic could exist with Machiavellian themes. The strengths of Game of Thrones. I think this doesn't need repeating, but most of you should know or probably agree with all of them. It's an anatomy of power. Loyalty is currency, truth as weapon. Characters evolve painfully, unpredictably, yet logically within their own trauma. I can go on and on about all of that. The dialogue sings. The production bleeds authenticity. I mean, there's just so much about the show that is just unbelievable for all audiences. However, there are the weaknesses, which many of us would probably agree with, and some kind of don't, which that actually blows my mind too. But the final act broke its own prophecy. Endings were rushed, arcs were inverted, logic was suspended, and ultimately the show the cost of too many moving parts. When the world and the characters stopped obeying its own rules, the audience held its breath hoping it would change, but that ending proved that not everyone can stick the landing. Now, from the writer's lens, I do not want to pretend to think that I'm as good as D.B. Weiss and David Benioff, who obviously created and stewarded the show up until the very end. Now, did they nail the landing? The answer is no, but did they do a really good job up until that point? Absolutely. But still, from the writer's perspective, there's much we can learn from them. For creators, Game of Thrones is a lesson on patience and architecture. World building isn't a castle. It's scaffolding. Remove one support too early, the whole thing falls apart. In my own work, I have to remind myself that the final episode actually starts in chapter 1. Foreshadow everything, earn everything. And finally, the show that embodies what all of these reach for: balance, consequence, and grace. Before you agree or disagree with me, I want you to take a long, hard thought on this. This is a show that for many was the pinnacle of what got them into this genre in the first place. Now that it's been on Netflix for quite some time, it has seen extreme volumes of rewatchability. And even its spin-off show has done better in the long run than it did when it initially came out. This show, for so many of us, myself included, gave us exactly what we needed for a blueprint of what makes something believable, enjoyable, a fantasy world building series that is entirely unique and still somehow so relatable. There are shows that thrill you and there are shows that change you. Avatar: The Last Airbender did both, and it did it through harmony. Magic isn't random here. It's philosophical made physical. Earth, fire, air, water, they're not just elements, they're also ways of seeing. Now, I will clarify, it is still a children's show. A lot of the dialogue feels not there. But when you look in terms of rewatchability, but when you look at it from a macro perspective and the storyline itself of coming from a singular purpose to a singular outcome to change and save the world through this dark ideology that's also reflective of human nature, it's pretty powerful. So let's get into the specifics of the strengths of the show. Its bending system is straight up genius. Elegant rules, clear limitations, and cultural reflection somehow. Its pacing, near perfect. Every arc feeds the next. It teaches empathy without preaching, spirituality without any sermon, and even humor serves purpose. It's balancing sorrow with warmth. Now let's talk about the weaknesses. I'm sure you really want to hear what those are. For me, it's only that it ended. Ultimately, some side characters kind of faded quicker than their potential, but that's just nitpicking, honestly, about perfection. I think for me, from a writer's lens, I do actively think about Avatar: The Last Airbender in terms of overall story, 4 incredible arcs, building into a culmination of what makes perfect sense and giving a satisfying ending that not only sticks the landing, but proves the earned journey of this found family that's come together for a mission in a finite amount of time that ends up changing the world. I mean, like, that's crazy. This is storytelling as architecture. The world mirrors the moral. Balance or fail. It's not quite the same heartbeat I chase in Tarak, but there are totally elements of it that I try to strive for. Every power must come with a price, and every triumph with humility. Avatar proves you don't need extreme darkness to have the depth. You need integrity. The greatest fantasy doesn't escape the human condition, it illuminates it. So across these 5 worlds, one pattern never lies. 1, rules make freedom meaningful. 2, emotion gives magic purpose. 3, consequence turns wonder into truth. And that's why I believe these stories endure, some a lot more than others. And because ultimately behind every spell, every story, every titan, every magical power, there's just a human trying to be understood. If you want to explore worlds that follow these same laws, where science bends towards myth and power has some heartbeat, then you should try stepping into mine. My novel, Tarak: Blood Dictates All, builds on all of these principles. Or at the very least, if you love deep world building, the link's below. Now it's your turn. Which world would you live in if you had to obey its rules? Drop it in the comments, please. I'm Sage Patel, and I've been your guide on the top 5 fantasy shows on IMDb, ranked on their best 250 fantasy shows of all time. Like, subscribe, comment, follow Sage and Sorcery, and until next time, keep dreaming about worlds worth living in.